Hello, this is Tales of Dread. In this episode, we take a second look at lake and sea monsters, so watch out for what lurks beneath the water. Enjoy, but don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. We spent a few days at a lakeside house that a friend had rented out a few years ago. We just wanted to get away from the busy city and go somewhere to relax and be able to take our dog with us. The house we got was perfect, just like I thought it would be when I looked at the pictures at the time. It was early spring, but it was still warm enough that I could sit on the couch or on the porch with a blanket over my legs and a cup of coffee in my hand while my husband took the dog for a long walk. It was one of those beautiful mornings when it was still dark, but I was dying to sit out there and finish the last chapter of my book when I saw something in the lake. Now, let me take a step back. At first, I didn't see it, but I could smell it. And my God, did it smell! It smelled like rotting bodies in an open sewer. It was the worst smell in the world. I know that water has its own smell, especially if it's a pond or lake instead of the salty sea. When the wind blew the wrong way, there was sometimes a smell, but nothing like this. It was awful, like the dog had left us a bunch of gifts. He shouldn't have put his hand over my nose and made me breathe through my mouth after I had eaten. I looked out into the water to try to figure out what in the world could be making it, hoping nothing bad had washed up on shore. Even though it might sound rude, I don't want my little vacation to end with wildlife services coming to take away a dead animal or something even worse. The cops. When I looked along the shore, I didn't see anything, which was a relief. Even if it didn't make sense of the smell. I started to think that one of the nearby homes might have plumbing problems. When I saw something interesting in the water. I remember it well because it wasn't yet daylight. Some parts of the lake was still in the dark, but I could see a shape in the water that looked like it was moving around. Trying to reach. When I put my glasses on, the shape became clearer right away, but I still had no idea what it could be. See, it looked like it was in the water. Whatever it was, it might have been a dinosaur. No, of course not. But that's the best way I can think of to explain how this thing is shaped. From what I could see above water, it looked like its neck was long, its head was small, and its body was big. I couldn't make out any specifics because I was too far away. So I couldn't tell you where its eyes were or what color it was, though it looked kind of dark brown or maybe gray. I couldn't see any arms or legs, but I'm guessing they were under the water. It seemed to rise up from the bottom of the lake. And by doing that, you somehow stirred up the water, which made it smell. I thought that's what must have happened, though. I wish I had thought to run and get my phone so I could take a picture. As you see, I wasn't carrying it. First of all, I'm not one of those people who is always on their phone. Second, when I want to read, I don't like to have my phone with me because it's too distracting. I had a strong feeling that this creature would be gone if I ran back into the house to get it. So I just sat there for a few more minutes and watched it. It was early in the season, so there was no one else around. Most of the vacation homes were still empty, and I think the people who lived there were either still in bed or too busy getting ready for work to sit and look at the lake. After a few seconds, it seemed like the creature just gave up and slowly went back under the water. I was still sitting there, staring out the window. By that time, the water had stopped moving and, thankfully, the smell had gone away. My husband had also returned. He just looked at me, and he could tell by the look on my face that I was upset. I remember what I saw. Or, I know I saw something that wasn't normal. I really don't know what it was. But that lake has to have something living in it. I know this because I both saw and smelled it. My husband and I have never really said that we don't believe in lake monsters. But maybe a strange animal lives in the area. Everyone knows that there are some things to watch out for in the water. You wouldn't swim with sharks if you didn't have protection. But we shouldn't just be careful and respectful of things we already know about. We have no idea what might be hiding in the ocean because it is so big. But sometimes we get a glimpse. It doesn't even seem possible, but it happened to me and a friend when we were deep in the ocean off the coast of Spain doing our own marine research. We've been getting some strange readings from our sonar, and we're excited and curious to find out what we might have found before I go any further. I should say that I'm not a real scientist or marine biologist. I kind of do research on my own. Over the years, I have bought and gathered a lot of gear. I also like to do my own research, so it's become more of an obsession than a hobby. Anyway, local fishermen have said that they have seen some strange things in the water. And we were out here trying to figure out what exactly they were seeing. We thought it might lead to the discovery of a whole new species, which is what all researchers hope for, right? So when we finally started to move, we were on high alert and made sure that all of our gear was set up and looking into the water. Then we had to wait, which is common in these kinds of situations. Like fishing, there is some excitement and then a lot of waiting. It's nothing new. And just when you were about to give up for the day, the sonar reader started going crazy, and something was moving very quickly toward us. The signs showed that this creature, whatever it was big. The size is huge. And to be honest, we were afraid for a second that if it hit the boat, it might have flipped us over. Yes, it did look like that big. It looks like it's going around us. And I started to hope like crazy that it wasn't some kind of prehistoric mammoth shark, because we probably wouldn't be able to present any research if we were in its stomach. Using the tools we had, we could see that its body mass was much bigger than any other creature around here, and it was also very, very long. Then, for one beautiful and scary second, this thing's head came out of the water. And here's the thing, the best way I can describe it is that it had a big, round body like a manatee, but instead of their calm demeanor and almost friendly, curious face, it looked like a shark, fierce and hungry. This thing looked like it was made by a manatee and a shark. And this terrible thing was the result. It even looked like it had roots around its body. Can you picture it? Its head was full of sharp, angry teeth, and its face was a little bit messed up. It made the boat rock and roll a lot, and we took on water. I don't think it hit the boat too hard, since we didn't flip over. I don't think it wanted to sink us. I think it was on its way somewhere else. Part of me thought we should try to stay as long as we could and film this amazing sighting. Take as many pictures as you can as proof. But I'm also a husband and a father, just like my coworker. So we decided to put an end to it and call it a day. We started our boat and got out of there. Luckily, it wasn't a killer shark that was determined to follow us and kill us. It didn't come after us. When it went back under the water, we never saw it again. Locals have seen the same creature many times, but they have never seen anything that can be proven. I'd like to go back, but not without a weapon. I work on the docks, and over the years I've seen some crazy things. And had the terrible misfortune of finding a dead body washed up on shore once. I'll never forget the horrible and strangely sad sight, but it didn't scare me. It wasn't gross like in the movies, but that's not what I'm running to tell you. I was doing my usual job of unloading a docker that had just come from Europe and had to leave as soon as possible. At the time, I was the only crew member there. The people who were helping with the cargo had gone to get breakfast before coming back. Since it was so early, it was still pretty dark, but that was fine. I was on the boat when I saw the water on the other side start to get a little rough. Lots of different things live in the water. We don't bother them more than we have to because most of them don't bother us. The gulls are more of a bother than anything else, but I was a little bit interested because whatever was in there was making a lot of noise. Then I saw something very strange. I can't think of any other way to describe it. I have no idea. I don't know if it was misshapen or what, but it was just a little bit higher than the water. It looked like parts of its body were gone. It looked like it was hungry or had changed. It was really weird. Does this make sense? At the end of each tentacle, it looked like there was another strange thing. Hold on, each of the little suction cups looked like it had little teeth or a sharper image. Even though it was only 10 feet away, I had never seen or heard of anything like it. I must have looked at it for a few minutes straight. It didn't make any moves to get closer. I'm not even sure if it even saw me or if that was even possible. It just turned around a few times, stirring up the water so that it looked like a mud bath, and then it disappeared and went back under the water. That's when I heard other people coming back and shouting as they walked. I stood there for a few more seconds, but it didn't come back up, and I never saw it again. When I told a few of my co-workers about it, most of them probably thought I had had too many beers the night before and was still drunk from a hangover. There's nothing like this, but who knows? I might have seen a rare type of octopus that lives in these waters. Also, my family is from somewhere in Scandinavia, and I come from a long line of dockworkers and fishermen, so my family, and I have seen a lot. So, that's my tale. I hope it works out for you. At the time, I was on vacation in the Caribbean. If you've ever been there, you know how warm and beautiful the water is. We stayed in a very expensive and exclusive hotel that had its own private beach access and area. One part of that beach was a quiet cove with great rocks for diving off of if you were brave enough. I went there with my sister one day, and we were the only ones there. We thought it was raining, so maybe no one else was there. What did it matter? You're going to get wet no matter what. But I think a lot of the guests liked to read while lying on the beach. So they all went to the pool area, which was safe because it was covered. A few people were enjoying the waves in the main part of the water, but it was just me and Cassidy. We each took a turn jumping off the rocks to see who could get the farthest out and who could swim back the fastest. It was her turn to be in the water, and I was getting ready to jump in when I heard her shout. It didn't sound like a yellow emergency, so I didn't jump in to help. Instead, I stood on a rock and called to her as I looked down at her. A mermaid can be seen. She called me back. Being 15 and her 12 at the time. We were smart kids, and our parents, who were at the hotel bar, weren't too far away. We could swim well, so they did trust us. I also thought Cassidy was a little too old to still believe in things like mermaids. But sometimes on vacation you go back to being a little kid, like when we went to Disney and she was still happy to be a princess, she didn't need to grow up too fast. I laughed at her and asked her if Ariel was there, laughing at the joke I was making on myself. I jumped in after her. Where was the mermaid? I asked. So, I'm looking everywhere for this mermaid, wondering what Cassidy is talking about, when I see ripples in the water, then what looks like a tail splashing very quickly. Now, let's say you were laughing at your sister because she made up mermaid friends in her head, and then you heard a splash. It did make me a little worried. It had to be a big fish that liked people. So I told her, right, and what makes you think she's a mermaid instead of a fish? My sister looked at me deadpan and said she had a human head. more ripples, then a closer splash, and I see more of the fish. It seemed to be a lot bigger than I was comfortable with. So I told her that now might be a good time to leave and go back to Mom and Dad. I can't leave her? She told me she wanted to be friends with her, but I told her it wasn't the right time or place for that. The ripples in the water got closer to us, as if whatever was down there was coming right up to the surface, and then it appeared. If you want to call it a mermaid, that's fine, but I'll always think of them as mythical half-women. But with the tail of a fish. This thing was almost all fish, but its head and face looked very strange. Yes, it looked like a person, but it was ugly. I can't say enough about how very scary it was. It made me think of a mix of those for to space things and the goblins from the Lord of the Rings movies. I mean, it looked bad. Both the head and the fish part had black skin that looked kind of rotten and grey. It had nothing in common with Ariel. It had huge slits for eyes and a small, sunken nose and mouth that seemed to open and close. It also had gills on its neck, which seemed to be a part of its body. Never before have I been so scared for my life. I screamed, and for a second I thought it was going to attack, but it just moved away and swam away. I'll never forget how it made me feel. It was kind of like an I shouldn't have been seen. I made a mistake, and if you can believe it, Cassidy was more upset with me because I hurt her friend's feelings than she was about how ugly it looked. Or the idea that nothing like it should ever happen. And if it did, no one should ever be able to see it. I told her to go back to shore, and I pretended to be sick for the rest of the trip so I wouldn't have to go back there. Since Cassidy was only 12, she couldn't go down there by herself. She never said anything else about it. But I still think about that thing when I wake up, even though it's been almost 10 years. It shouldn't have been able to happen. I think we were lucky that day because I really think something was wrong, which would be evil. Something that should have been more than happy to tear us apart should have done just that. It could have been a mermaid or a siren. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about old stories or sea stories. I don't know if it's the cause of deaths that don't make sense. But it was the worst, most horrible thing I've ever seen. Not a single day goes by when I wish to God I hadn't seen it. I went fishing with my uncle on the Mississippi River when it was pretty cold and there was a thin layer of fog on the water. We spent most of the day on the river, and the air was getting colder because the sun kept threatening to go behind the clouds without giving us any warning. My fishing line got tight. At first, I thought I had hooked something still, like a rock, but rocks don't move around like that. That was crazy. Try as I may. I couldn't pull in what I had caught on my own, and I was sure I was going to lose the line and maybe even my rod. My uncle, who was always looking for a way to help, grabbed the net and moved close to the edge of the boat. As the beating was getting close, I couldn't watch as closely as I would have liked because I was trying not to lose my line. The fishing pole I had wasn't cheap. I didn't want to catch anything, and I didn't want it to get away. My uncle threw his net into the water, and at first I couldn't see anything, but I swore I saw a flash of things. I saw a hand reach up out of the white water and grab his arm. He yelled and staggered. I was so surprised by what happened that I lost focus and my fishing line broke. When I went to check on my uncle, he looked like he had just seen a ghost. I asked him if he thought a hand could reach up from the water and grab him. He vehemently denied it, but the truth was plain to see and even more obvious on his face. I didn't press the issue because I was sure of what I had seen. In fact, he brought it up again a few years later while drinking bourbon, and said what I had always known. He added some information that I didn't know. The hand that grabbed him was rough and had only 4 fingers with black nails that were very thin. He had messed himself right there, which was another thing I didn't notice at all. It's funny, because I always thought that monster stories didn't belong in a place as normal as the Mississippi. I'm one of those idiots who do things they probably shouldn't, like exploring underwater caves like a beginner. In fact, you might be surprised by how many people don't have papers. Most of them are too small to even be worth putting on a map, which is why they aren't documented. Most of them are also not very safe. There's really only one way to tell which ones are safe and which ones are not. When I started exploring off the coast of California, I found the one thing that almost made me give up what I do for good. It was just clear enough that I could see the ghost of what I was looking for floating just below the water's surface. I thought it might be a shipwreck that was still afloat, but when I snorkeled under it, I saw that it was just a small underwater cave with a deep hole below. I put on my gear and went in. Most caves either get bigger or smaller at a certain point. This also didn't work. It was the same the whole time I was there and for as long as I was there. I started to wonder what could make a long rocky tube happen by itself. The passageway was so narrow that I couldn't possibly turn around in it. When I was ready to leave, I would have to go backwards. I wasn't ready for how quickly that moment came. With my light in front of me, I came around a large bend in the tube. In front of me was what I thought was a crack lined with strange rocks, but the fissure started opening and closing his mouth and letting a few bubbles out. The wall of rocks. The fisherman started moving toward me as he set his hook. I was horrified when I realized I was looking at a mouth full of teeth. I couldn't stop myself from getting scared. As I backed up at the slowest, most painful pace I'd ever had to go, I was forced into the mouth of the person in front of me. Wasn't very fast, but it was faster than me and going to catch up to me. When I finally got to the edge of the cave, I pushed off backwards with my hands. The mouth braced itself against the lip of the tube and shot out at me with explosive force. The mouth just missed my face by a few inches, and the force pushed me back. I had a vague idea that I needed to get out of the water because I was going to pass out soon, which I had just about done. I've read about worms and other things, but I've never read about one that was that big or that had a mouth like that, with a jaw that could move back and forth. I'm lucky to be alive, and I've been thinking about how often I look for thrills. I tried to talk myself into going on another trip somewhere, but I just couldn't do it. My grandfather had the special opportunity to go around the area around Loch Ness. Now, I know that there are enough of these stories to fill a whole library, and this one isn't necessarily amazing, but it's special to him. When my grandfather was a boy, he was friends with an older man who was a family friend. This man knew that my grandfather liked monsters and strange creatures of all kinds, and when you're that age, going out in the loch gives you a thrill because you're waiting for the monster to attack at any moment. But the monster never came after them. At least, not in the way you thought when you saw 2 of them eating lunch on the loch one afternoon. My grandfather said he had to go to the bathroom. So, after docking the boat, the 2 got out and found a place nearby, like a rock or bush, to sit. My grandfather swears to this day that it happened while he was going to the bathroom. He saw something with a long neck and a narrow head come up out of the water, sniff around the boat, and eat the food that was there. My grandfather was so upset that he almost didn't remember to pull up his pants. His friends couldn't believe what had just happened, and my grandfather said he was as white as the clouds in the sky. The man never completely admitted what had happened, but he also never denied it. My grandfather kept that memory close to his heart until the day he died. My best friend stopped going scuba diving or exploring the water in any way. When he went diving to find leopard seals, something happened to him that really scared him. I know what you're thinking, leopard seals sound like pretty scary predators, but when they meet people, they change into something else. They treat people like guests and often invite them to play. Sometimes, a leopard seal will try to kill a penguin for a nearby person as a kind of grisly hospitality. My friend got pretty good at figuring out where leopard seals like to swim. Because the water was so hot, he couldn't do it for very long at a time. But when he got to, it was a big deal. The day came when the leopard seal went deeper to try to make friends with my friend. She would dive sharply down and then come back up to see if you would follow. Technically, you could have, but you would have had to be very careful because that's where the water got even colder and would be dangerous for humans. He finally decided to follow her, and when he did, she showed him something he didn't think was possible in that environment, even though cold water animals aren't that rare. But she led him to a place below where weird corals and animal shapes were growing in ways that, as far as my friend knew, had never been seen before. I know that's a very bold thing to say, especially since he's a very trustworthy and valid person. But I really do believe him. He forgot for a moment how uncomfortable the cold was, so he could start looking around. He was getting into a very strange patch of coral when he said or thought that his leopard seal friend attacked him. She shoved him away with all her strength as the coral he was looking at writhed and shot up like a jet engine. The coral's extensions tore through her body, and spikes shot out of her back. As simple as that. The animal was either killed or made helpless. My friend hoped she was dead because he said she was being dragged down into the ground or into some kind of horrible mouth. It took her a while, and the whole thing really shook him up. Since then, he hasn't gone diving again. He still talks about what happened to that leopard seal, and I could tell he feels bad about it. After all, he thinks she saved his life, and he won't say exactly where it is because he's afraid someone else will try to find it. I don't want to be known because most of my family is involved in different kinds of piracy at sea. I'm sorry, but for some of us, it's the only way to get by. I don't hate the people that my friends and I raid and steal from. But people like me have been left behind. And I'm not ready to just give up and die before I'm 50 when you're already thought of as the dirtiest person on the planet. You will see and do things that most people don't get to do or see. One of her better hauls won us some scooping diving gear, but we didn't know how to use it. It took us a few months to figure it out, but it let us look at things that had already sunk underwater. During one dive, what looked like an old tanker was found. I didn't think there was much chance that we'd find anything. But my friends were eager to look inside just in case, as if they had nothing better to do than risk their lives to see a very strange thing on the ship. There was a large metal chest that had been bolted to the starboard hold. It looked like it was supposed to be a secret, but I didn't think it was much of a secret that you had something like that in your ship. Two of my teammates went underwater with bolt cutters to see if they could get inside. After a few minutes and then an hour, we started to worry because we didn't know how much oxygen they had left. That's two more. My friends went underwater with them. I sat on the boat and looked at the spot where the wreckage had been found, hoping to see something. After 15 minutes, I started to get more worried. I put on my own scuba gear and went underwater, not to follow them, but to see what was going on and help them if they needed it. Then, as soon as I went under, I saw a cloud of red water coming from the chest. The lid was hanging off, and there was some kind of slithering rope movement in the shape of a chewed-up spool. Friends and families of my fellow soldiers don't believe my story at all. The only thing they know for sure is that they left me and didn't come back. But I swear my story is true, and part of the reason I've been trying to stop stealing is because of it. Some things just aren't worth taking the chance on. My uncle has a lot to say. He has a lot of expensive things, but he doesn't know how to take care of them. He knows how to start his boat, but he has no idea how to keep it in good shape. His clumsiness follows him everywhere, even over the waves. We were already a long way over the water, and he invited me out there just to show off all of his stuff. It's not like he hasn't shown me around his impressive estate by the water before. When he looked back at the Florida coast, his house stood out like a futuristic white tower. But it doesn't look as good. The 4th or 5th I was just having fun being so far out in the water. He turned off the engine and said it was time to just have fun. That has always been my plan. I pretended to listen as he told me how much money he had made and what he was going to buy with it. I was about to go to sleep when I felt like I might move a little. So I opened my eyes right when he did, and we both gave each other the same look. I looked over at the side of the boat just in time to see something with the body of a regular shark push the whole boat. But it had eyes in the way you would expect a spider to have them. It couldn't have been a mistake, because when it came to the surface, it started shooting sticky threads at us like a web. Part of it stuck to my uncle's arm, and it was so sticky that it almost tore the skin off. Everyone was in a big hurry to start the boat and get out of there. The boat then struggled against the strength of the silk, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the hell it was, but it finally broke free a few seconds before we landed, and some of the silk must have gotten into the propeller blade. When we did get back on land, my uncle took advantage of the chance to call and tell people that we had found a new kind of animal. It seems that the sticky substance was too much like what sea cucumbers and other animals throw up. So not many people took him seriously. Not that people didn't usually take him seriously in the first place. Anyway, running through the ocean was something I had never done before. Even though it was a crazy thing to do, it still makes me a little scared and makes me not want to go out into the deep ocean. I work at a lifeguard station on the coast near Main Street. There are just enough people and boats going by that I and my team need to be close by at all times. Since then, I've been looking for work in a different field. One time, our little hub was being remodeled and updated, and someone had to stay the night there to make sure that none of the copper or other valuable pieces that were out in the open would be stolen when the workers went home. I made the most of the times I could just sit and look at the water. Something I didn't have much time to do when I was on duty because there was always something to do or check on. After some time, something was in the water, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. It moved into the light of the setting sun in a way that I could see. When I saw that the nose of a small boat had gone down, my instincts to help kicked in, and I got ready to go out and make sure everything was okay. I knocked on the boat's half-submerged door several times to see if I could hear movement or if anyone would answer. I also put my ear underwater and pressed it to other parts of the boat to see if I could hear anything. There was nothing in there that said people couldn't be asleep. I stopped swimming and went back inside. When there was a single, loud knock on my door, I was able to pick up my cell phone and call for help. Now that I look back, I can't tell you why I got so upset. Something wasn't quite right. When the knock came again, but this time with a strange gurgling sound, the feeling got worse. It was a deep, throaty sound that almost made me throw up. After a few more knocks, I heard the sound of wet, heavy footsteps moving away from the door. After being quiet for a few minutes, I got up the courage to look around. I saw big, wet, strong footprints leading to the back door of my house. I went with them to the water, where it looks like something came out of the water to visit me. That was the worst sleep I've ever had. I not only locked the door, but I also blocked it. I wasn't sure if I would have had the guts to get up and look if someone tried to break in and steal some valuable metals. I'm taller than 6 feet and look like I'd try out for Jersey Shore. What does that tell you? On the other hand, the footprints were not from a person. They don't look like shoes either. They had 4 toes and were bigger than any footprints a person could make. To say the least, this whole thing has upset me a lot. I'm sure you've heard of scary big and scary fish that fishermen have caught at sea. Like a lot of the details you talk about in your accounts that are listed on your channel. Well, I also have an interesting story about a big fish I don't know much about that I saw while cage diving with great white sharks off the coast of Mexico a long time ago, around 2002. To be exact, I won't tell you who I was with on the boat, how we got dressed, and how we got into the cage, because that's pretty much the same thing. But anyway, diving with great white sharks is really cool, and if you ever get the chance to do it, it's a lot of fun. I loved it and was having the best time of my life. Even though I'm not much of an adrenaline junkie or thrill seeker, I had to do this at least once to cross it off my bucket list. So, here is where things start to get crazy. So I'm in the cage and these big, beautiful fish are swimming all around me. Knowing I'm only 20 feet away from a man-eating predator, or at least what Hollywood makes them out to be. About 3 of them were swimming around me, and that's when I noticed they suddenly stopped wanting to do that. If that makes any sense, it sounds like they're heading in the opposite direction, out into the open sea. And as I sat there confused, wondering why they weren't swimming around me anymore, I started to see that a very large shape was starting to come out from deep below me. Now, at first I thought this might be a whale, but the shape, whatever it was, never got completely flat enough for me to see clear details. All I could really say was that it looked like a very, very big, dark shadow that was moving. Maybe it was some kind of craft. It's difficult to say. It was long, like if you took a sperm whale and made it even bigger. I'm not good at describing things, but the best way I can say what it was is that it was a big marine animal or fish or something that was much, much bigger than any great white I've ever seen. But again, I can't tell you much because it never got close enough to the surface, even in the water, for me to see what it was. When I think back on what happened, I can only think that the great white sharks ran away when they saw this thing coming toward us. Now tell me what's under all that stuff in the ocean that even makes great white sharks run away when they see a fish. So that's a mystery that will have to wait until another day. And I'm not joking when I say that this thing had a huge shape. It covered the whole bottom of my cage. Again, it was just a mass of black. I couldn't tell what it was, but it seemed to move in front of me, below me, and behind me for maybe a minute or two before going back down into the depths where I couldn't see it anymore. After that, the sharks didn't come back, and when I got back to the boat, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I only said that it seemed like the sharks had lost interest, and that was it. It didn't really scare me, but it did make me think about all the strange things in the ocean. I feel like an idiot for saying this, but I think I saw something that didn't belong, whatever that means. Last summer, I was at my grandfather's lake house in a wooded area of Louisiana. While I was there, I saw a creature, or what I think was a late creature. I know that sounds like a crazy plot for a Hollywood movie, but I promise you that the truth is even crazier than fiction. I couldn't figure out what it was or say what it was. So I hope someone can help me figure out what it could be. After doing some research, I found that you seem to have a series about animals that live in lakes and the ocean. This could be the answer I've been looking for. Every summer, my dad and I go fishing on the lake a few times with our fishing poles. The trip was the same as any other. This time, we got our gear together, did our usual cola pop chuck, and rode out into the lake. Usually, I will keep rolling until I have enough data, and we found the right spot. I put my bait on the hook and threw it into the water. Almost right away, Dad got a bite. He pulled out a 3 trout, which is why he caught it so quickly. See, young fish aren't smart enough to avoid your bait yet, and they don't even know what it is. So it's easier for us to catch them. We don't take our phones out on the boat, so the only way I can tell what time it is by looking at the sun. I'd say it was about 45 minutes after the fish caught his eye before it finally bit. It was a fighter for sure. After pulling and leading it in over and over again, I was about to pull it out of the water when a bigger fish grabbed it, hook and all. I rehooked my line and threw it back into the water. I don't know why, but bigger fish loved to eat my smaller pieces. A little while later, I got another bite, and I was determined not to let this one get away. I let it go for a while before I really started to read it in. I waited long enough for it to look like the fish was caught off guard. I pulled it out of the water quickly, but that didn't stop the other fish from jumping out of the water to bite it. As I moved away from it, it wasn't much bigger than the 11 fish I caught, but it was a predator for sure. It went back into the water, and for some strange reason, it looked at me for a minute before swimming back under. It was a light blue fish with strange eyes that were yellow and brown. It didn't look like it had scales, but almost looked like it had skin. Having second thoughts. I'm not sure it was even a fish. It looked like a fish's head, but it wasn't like any fish I had ever seen. I told my dad I had to go to the bathroom, and I thought that was the end of my day. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, but I think the lake and the heat were messing with my head. It was pretty hot outside, and I think all I needed to do to get rid of the bad headache I was having was to lie down. The next day, we went out again. I picked a different spot on the lake in case what I saw there yesterday was still there. We both had to wait a while before our lines were pulled in, and whatever happened to the fish must have happened overnight. I told my dad that we must have caught all the fish yesterday and that the lake must be closed for the summer. He laughed at me and said we should go somewhere else because it was bad luck to stay in the same place for 2 hours and not find anything. So I rode my horse over to a place near the lake's edge on the other side of the lake, where the woods were. There wasn't much going on until my dad got a fish. I have no idea what he caught, but it was a big one. He was about to lose his grip on the pole when I grabbed it and a fish jumped out of the water. It had to be a 16 fish. That or something like it was huge. But I wasn't surprised by that. What did it was the huge hole that was cut in its side. We had to fight something that was already eating it, so it was very heavy. I looked around in the water and saw 2 yellow-brown eyes that were just barely glowing. Then I realized that it was the same thing that had happened the day before. After pulling that thing out, my dad was a little scared, so he decided to call it. We went back to the shore. We had to go to the store to buy food for dinner because the only fish we caught that day was one that was already half eaten. Dad said that fishing wasn't as interesting to him this year. I told them that if things didn't get better the next day, I wouldn't mind going home early. The next morning, I got up early and went to the lake to sit on the dock. As the sun came up, I watched the water. From where I was, I couldn't see any fish in the water. Usually, you can come out here and watch the whole lake move like an orchestra of watercolors. But not today. The lake was still, and it looked like all the fish had left. I looked over to where we had been yesterday and saw a fawn come out of the woods and head toward the water. I watched as it stumbled across the ground and put its head in the water to drink. It was so quiet until something long and white came out of the water, bit the animal on the neck, and pulled it in. I jumped up and looked around frantically to see if it had gotten out, but after 10 minutes I could guess what had happened. I just let out a sigh, and went inside. Dad was having a cup of coffee when I walked into the kitchen. I told them about the lake and that there were no fish in it. I said that the fish had probably already moved on, so it wouldn't help to stay another day to fish. I didn't tell him, though, what happened to the fawn. Even though he was upset, he knew I was right. We packed up all of our things and put them in our truck. As I turned around for one last look at the lake, I swear it looked like something out of a nightmare. I was sure I could still see its eyes staring at me from under the water, and then something much scarier happened at that very moment. I heard what sounded like something heavy moving around under the dock, and then the dead fawn's body, or should I say half-eaten body, came floating out from under the docks into view. There wasn't much left of it besides a big pile of torn-up flesh that had been eaten and one or two legs, which is the only real way to tell. It was a fawn or it was still a fawn. At some point, it's safe to say that my dad and I no longer fish out there. I don't usually believe in sea monsters, mermaids, or anything else that is weird or is said to not exist. But when my friend and I went fishing outside of Florida's coast in May, something very strange happened. I am by no means an experienced fisherman, but I do enjoy fishing as a hobby. So, my friend Ryan is a decent fisherman. He goes fishing off the coast all the time. At least, that's what I think it's called. That's what he calls it, though. So he's taken me a few times, but this time was the same as the others, and with the whole coyote thing going on, I thought a nice day of fishing would have been good for both of us. Everything was fine until a few hours after we were anchored, when we saw these big shapes start to circle our small boat. I almost wondered if they were dolphins, but I thought dolphins traveled in bigger groups. I don't know what kind or size they come in, but these seemed a little bit bigger and had a different shape than dolphins. What was strange was how they were acting. They were also different colors and had different shapes, if that makes any sense. They seemed dark, and you couldn't make out many details. They seemed to have long tails at the end, and they kept swimming in groups of 3. They would swim around our boat for a while, then swim a short distance away. Then they'd swim back to where we were. It was strange, and I didn't know what to think about it. Even my friend Ryan thought it was weird. We didn't really know what to do. We keep casting our rods and trying to fish as usual, ignoring whatever these fish or sea creatures were. Well, they never got close enough to the ground for us to know for sure what they were. I'm going to say dolphins, but dolphins don't behave that way. They don't swim like that either. And whatever these things were, they followed our boat for probably 2 to 3 hours. We were not at all throwing chum into the water. So I'm not sure if they were just curious about our boat or if they wanted to jump on our lines, but they didn't try to do either. So the bait we had wasn't what made them come. Even now, it's strange to think about. I'm not scared because I didn't see anything, so it doesn't scare me. But I don't know what it is, I can't put my finger on it. My friend says that was the strangest fishing trip he's ever been on, and he's been out on the ocean a lot, at least with me. Anyway, this is not my story, but the story of a close friend of mine who has been fishing for over 25 years in the Gulf of Mexico, on the East Coast, and on the West Coast. He has caught all kinds of fish, including sharks and a lot of other legal and illegal fish. I'm not going to stand here and cheer for people who catch sharks, but he's already done it. I won't say much about what happened before. But I want you to know that he's caught his fair share of fish. So, when he catches something unusual, it will stick out in his mind. For example, he told me a few years ago that he caught something very strange off the coast of Texas. He said that what he caught looked like hell, like it was very long and had strange tendrils coming out of the back of its body. It's kind of like a jellyfish's tentacles. Even though the creature didn't have tentacles like jellyfish, he said it looked very strange. It was long, like an eel or like a serpent, but it didn't look like an eel. It looked like a viper fish and was about 8 to 9 feet long, and as thick as his torso. He said he had never seen a fish like it before and wasn't sure what to call it or how to classify it. He took a picture of it and sent it to one of his best fishing friends. They didn't know what the hell it was and had never seen anything like it, but he, being him, didn't really think much of it. He cut it up and ate it at home, and it didn't seem to kill him. I kind of wish he had kept the picture or at least the fish so we could show people, but he doesn't seem like the type of person who would catch a new kind of fish. Get pumped up about it. He doesn't care if he's seen it before or not. He's going to put it on his grill and eat it anyway. With the whole quarantine thing going on right now, that's pretty much how he feels about it. We ended up talking, and I somehow brought up fishing. We talked about that for a while, and I asked him about the strangest fish he'd ever caught. Then he thought of that, and he told me about it. Anyway, I just thought I'd tell you this because it might be interesting to you. I wanted to send you this email because I recently found your video series about lake and sea monsters. I was amazed by how many stories you've gotten from fishermen and sea adventurers, even though I'm neither. I have a lot of friends who live in England, and I can think of 2 right off the top of my head. They have some crazy stories to tell. In fact, I have to put you in touch with them because the stories they have to tell will blow your mind. But they recently told me one story, and even though I'm not very good at remembering what they said, I can give you a general idea of what happened. Both of them were fishing somewhere near England's coast. I don't know exactly where it was because I don't remember if they told me, but they both told me that something very big bumped the bottom of their boat and then stuck its head out of the water, probably not even 10 feet away, and looked at both of them. They were both shocked and scared, and keep in mind that this was a tiny fishing boat, not a tiny wooden raft and definitely not a commercial fishing boat. Both of them told me that the creature looked like some kind of aquatic dinosaur. People said it looked like a sturgeon, but it had a very, very long neck and a small head that made it look like something from the past. This is the best way they can describe it. Its mouth was open, but it didn't look dangerous. Like how some fish or animals have their mouths open, this thing, whatever it was close enough for them to see that it had tiny teeth with sharp edges and black eyes. Then it put its head back under the water and kept going. Neither of them really knows what it was or why it bumped into their boat. I don't think anyone has ever really told me what its body looked like. Just now, they told me how big it was. They must not have known that whatever it was that bumped the boat was the cause of their mistake. So, it stuck its head out of the water to see what was going on around it. That's why it seemed to just stare blankly at my two friends before putting its head back in the water and going on as if nothing had happened. They said that its neck was very long, at least 20 to 30 feet. And I'm not joking. It's not too much to say. They said it was much longer than Interrupt's neck. The body of this thing had to be huge. It was probably 30 to 40 feet long, and the neck was probably 20 to 30 feet long. People said that it was tall and that the head was probably about the size of a human torso. From the edge of the mouth to the back of the neck, it was about 3 feet. Again, this is all guesswork on their part based on what they saw about 20 feet away from this thing. They said it's almost impossible to know for sure, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. Things have gone crazy off the coast of England. Even though it's very scary, they've told me that stranger things have happened, and that this is neither the first nor the last time. They'll probably see something that isn't supposed to exist or that humans don't know much about. I'm going to keep their names secret for now. But one of them has a grandfather who has been a fisherman his whole life. He told a story about a time, I don't know if it was in the 1970s or 1980s, but it was a long time ago. His small ship was attacked by something they called the Kraken. I know that sounds crazy, but the best way they could describe it was that it was a big creature that looked like an octopus and was much bigger than their boat. It tried to drag them down to the ocean floor. When I heard this, my mind immediately went to the Kraken scene in Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't think it was quite that big, but it must have been big enough to try to take a boat down. So who knows? There are a lot of big, dangerous creatures in the ocean, and some of them live so deep that no one will ever find out they are there. I don't want to write too much here. So I'll talk to my friends and ask them to send you some amazing stories, and then we'll see what happens next. But for now, just try to stay away from the ocean. It's clear that there are things living in there that we don't even understand. After all, humans are very haughty, and what we think we've found and what goes extinct, we find out a few years later was a lie, and things that we thought were extinct still live on. When I was a little boy, I liked to watch my dad fish. I guess it was inevitable that when I got older, I would do what my dad did, and that's what I did. I was a fisherman for 40 years. I guess the years went by quickly, because I didn't stop to think about the past until I was 87. I think now is a good time to talk about something that happened to me when I was 19 years old, in the summer of 1952. Two of my co-workers and I were on our boat, fishing off the coast of Cornwall. We were looking for red salmon because a local butcher would pay us a lot of money if we gave him fish. We were on a boat on a hot summer day and had a few beers. We took off our t-shirts and waved to a group of young women who were having a picnic on the beach. Even though we didn't know the girls, they called us to come to their picnic. At the time, I was 19 years old and had been working as an apprentice fisherman for about 5 years. It was very rare for me to meet someone of the opposite gender. The women kept talking and waving at us. Their vanilla perfume seemed to fill up our boat with its smell. Its soft, feminine sounds were almost technomic, and they made me feel like a young girl again. I remember it as if it happened just yesterday. As I write this, I can't help but laugh, because a wise old man once said, "The devil, take the woman." And where does following your young desires lead? Well, you know that what happened that day was pure madness and terror. And mesmerism. The other people on the boat decided to jump off and swim to the beach so they could walk up to the girls. I told them that it seemed like a good idea and urged them to go. As soon as they jumped, the sky turned very grey and it started to rain hard. I watched as they struggled against a wave that was getting more and more wild. I took a quick look up with the girls. I could see them jumping up and running away, probably because they were afraid of the rain or didn't want to meet the guys. I started to wonder if it was a trick or if it was too good to be true. The rain kept coming down, and I could see that my friends were having a hard time. Then I saw something horrible that makes my hand tremble with fear. A big creature that looked like a snake came up from the depths of the ocean. It was over 15 feet long and slimy, just like a sea snake. It looked like it had things that were a foot long, and its head was about the same size as a human head. It was a scary thing to see, and just remembering it scares me. The guys in the water saw the snake, and I saw that it looked like it was after them. My friend was getting poked, and then I saw signs of blood. I grabbed something nearby and threw it in the direction the snake was now flailing around, jumping in and out of the water like a dolphin, but viciously and with clear intent to hurt it. The snake turned around, saw me, and ran towards me through the water. It has a huge tail. It shot up and tried to hit me in the face, but I used an oar to block it. It seemed like it was intent on striking at me. It hits hard and wants to eat human flesh. It seemed like I was so scared I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like it before, and at 19 years old I was still a sea virgin. Even my father had never heard of or seen anything like this before. I tried to fight the beast, but I felt like I was going to lose. The creature that looked like a snake got on the boat, and was now facing me straight on. The boat tipped over a little, and seawater poured into my feet, which are now wet. I knew I was going to die, but I also knew I wouldn't just give up. I kept kicking at the beast furiously, hoping that if I hit it, it would run away in fear. However, this beast looks just as dangerous as it did hungry, and I finally managed to hit it with the oar, but by then the boat was almost completely submerged. Suddenly, the storm stopped in the sky, and this creature that looked like a snake went back down into the water. Things didn't change much, so I thought it was safe to swim back. And as I did, I couldn't find my friends anywhere. When I found them later, they had deep cuts and wounds from where this thing had attacked them, and they were almost out of blood. When we told other people what happened, they didn't believe us. But maybe some biologists thought it might have been a strange underwater creature that science hadn't yet found. No matter what it was scary. And I was glad I never saw it again in all the years I went fishing. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but this story happened to me a lot when I was younger, and I haven't had anything like it since. I know that there are crazy sea stories out there, but this is mine. Just keep in mind that almost every fisherman out there has his or her own high, what lurks beneath. Let me introduce myself. I'll call myself David, and I teach first grade in Northern Ireland. I found your channel because I recently went through something upsetting that has been messing with my mind. I've been out of work for a year and don't see how I could go back to work right now. Every year, not just because of COVID but also because of what I saw and experienced during the summer of 2018. The teachers take the students in primary 7, who are all about 11 years old, to a beach resort. It's always a fun and memorable weekend to say goodbye to them before they move on to high school. The weekend is always full of different things to do and fun things to do. The kids love it, and so do the teachers. For the past 10 years, I've really enjoyed going on the annual trip, but that was before 2018. I was in charge of a group of about 5 kids, and it was my job to take them on a short canoe trip. This was just off the coast of Cork, and to say it was beautiful would be an understatement. I remember thinking how lucky I was to be Irish and how lucky I was to have a job that let me visit such beautiful places and get paid for it. We all went out in our canoes, and we all wore life jackets. We also had whistles with us in case we got into trouble. Most of the kids already knew how to canoe, so I was good at it. But one kid had autism and had trouble using his oar because he didn't have good hand-eye coordination. He was pretty smart, so he wasn't a complete vegetable. I had to help him and take a little more time to show him how to do it, but he got the hang of it in the end. He was just a little slower than the rest of us, but we all slowed down for him. We were sailing to a place with a very small strain, where we planned to stop for a snack. I put some juice, cookies, and fruit in my backpack so that all the kids would be full and ready to sail back. Some of the kids said it was hard to row because the water currents were getting a little rough. It was a little scary, but I could see that we weren't too far away from land. The other child who was having trouble, Dennis, was having a lot of problems. His oar fell into the water and started to sink, and he was starting to feel scared. I told the others to row to shore while I tied a bow to Dennis's boat and pulled him with me. When I got close to him, I saw something big and green that looked like a spider web almost under the water. I looked down and thought it was some weird kind of seaweed or something, but as I tied the bow of the boat to Dennis's boat, this thing kept going around and around. It also looked like it was getting bigger and then getting smaller. At that moment, I just hoped it wasn't a jellyfish or another dangerous sea creature. When the water stopped moving, I turned around to check on the other kids and make sure they were safe on land. As I closed my eyes, a big snake-like creature came out of the water and bit my forehead. It had a big, sharp fang that was now covered in my blood. I was freaking out like hell and yelled for Dennis to get in my boat, but he was freaking out even more because this thing kept shooting out of the water like lightning bolts and trying to bite me. It was the most scary thing I've ever done. I was being attacked on the water while I was with a very vulnerable child, and I had never seen a sea creature be so aggressive. I had also been bitten, and my forehead is already getting bigger. Almost certainly as a response to the poison that came out of this bite. This snake, whatever it was, wasn't very big. It was probably about the size of a normal rattler, but it was big enough to be aggressive and mean, and from what I know, I didn't know how poisonous it could have been. Sea snakes have very poisonous bites. I swore and puffed. I finally got Dennis's bow on my boat, and then I started sailing like hell. This thing took off again. Its eyes are like slits, yellow and comforting, but its voice makes it clear that it is angry and wants to kill me. I did everything I could to avoid it, but it didn't work. The impact caused the canoe boat to shake and almost flip over. When we finally got to the shore, the beast seemed to stop trying to get us, and it left us alone. I carried Dennis out of the boat. He was small, but he was dangerous. He was dripping with sweat. The other kids ran up to us and gave us big hugs. They had seen everything that scared us. All of the kids' faces were white from shock, and they needed water and food right away. We called an ambulance and told them what happened. I got first aid and had my wound bandaged. Luckily, the venom wasn't deadly, but I have to say that the venom of that event has stayed with me every day since. Every moment, every day, I feel fear and stress. I felt like I was in that boat as I fought for my life, and the life of the little boy who had been given to me. I'm sure I'll never get on that boat again, and I don't even want to go near water. The last I heard, the kids had stopped going to school and were being homeschooled for now. Dennis had completely shut himself off from the world. We were all scared by what we saw, which was clear. I hope that by telling you about this, you can give me more information and let me know if other people have seen similar creatures in the sea nearby. I know it was a sea serpent, but it wasn't anything crazy like a leviathan or anything, and I've never seen a sea serpent be so mean. I mean, this thing was so determined to make me fall that I almost tipped over our canoe. Also, I want to thank everyone for all the hard work they do. We really do thank you. People say that the things you go through as a child can make you who you are as an adult. They say that the lessons we learn, both good and bad, help shape us into the adults we become. They also say that there are some people, places, and things you will meet in your life that will always haunt you. I don't know if that's true for most people. But there is one thing I know for sure: I will never, ever forget the day I turned 16. It was the end of the summer, and we were about to start school again. Even though the evenings were still long, there were signs that it was finally starting to cool down a little bit. It was a good thing that my birthday was on a weekend. So I went to the lake with a bunch of my friends in the afternoon. I don't remember my grandfather talking about a creature that was said to have been seen coming out of the lake when he was a boy. He hadn't seen anything himself, but it was the talk of the town at the time. Other than a few old newspaper articles that were framed and put up in the town hall. It just turned into a story that people told each other around the campfire, you know. Well, those kinds of stories, and if you've ever been in Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, you probably know what I'm talking about. Of course, when you get a bunch of excited kids all worked up after a day in the sun, some of us might be trying to impress a certain girl. People couldn't help but talk about the famous but mysterious dead creature, and a few of us took it as a dare to stay at the lake after dark and see if we could be the ones to wake it up after 50 years. Bravado and sleep are two different things during the day, and I wouldn't have been sitting on the shore of the lake at 2 a.m. if it weren't for the look in the girl's eyes. While my friend was smart enough to fall asleep. He would do that, of course. He was always the kind of kid who let me take the blame for things, and he wanted things to be easy this time, so I decided to be the brave one. I didn't feel scared. Not that, but I was definitely a little nervous. Even though they were just stories, you can't tell me you wouldn't be scared to sit by the lake waiting for something to happen and then telling yourself it was just a story over and over again. I never thought for a second that I would see anything. But when you can only see by the light of a campfire and a flashlight, your eyes play tricks on you. This makes for a very spooky setting. If I do say so myself, that's when I heard splashing coming from what sounded like the middle of the lake. It was pretty quiet, but it was definitely quiet at night. My first stupid thought was that it was a shark or an alligator, even though this was just a plain lake and not a lake or swamp, and neither of those things have ever been seen here. Even at the time, I kind of laughed at the thought of it. I feel very stupid and foolish. After my brain started working again, I carefully stood up and crept closer and closer to the shore. Then I took the strong torch outside and showed it to the lake. I think the only reason I didn't drop the stupid thing was because I was too scared to move at first. Most likely, I'll never be able to say what I saw with my own eyes. I didn't want to believe it, but I'm going to do my best. Even though I was quite far away, I could see its head very well. The light from the beam made it look like an alligator, but instead of a strong, flat torso, it had a long, thick spine, like maybe an anaconda. What I was chasing made a splash with its long tail, which was a long way from its head. This meant that this thing was very big. Then it turned, as if it could feel the light from the shore, and I caught a glimpse of those wild, lizard-like eyes. They were almost a dull yellow color. I remember that I yelled and turned off the light. Of course, my scream woke up my friend, and by the time I got back to mine, he was already there with his. There was no more noise or anything. And for sure, nothing like that was ever seen again. Over the next few months, people from all walks of life went back to the lake. I heard that kids and scientists and even biologists were using their phones, but nothing happened. Anyway, I remember what happened that night. Even when I'm sleeping, I can still see its face. I'll never forget it. It's so strange and different from our world that you can't miss it. No other fish or animals were there. It might have happened. I can't believe that it's real. My dad fished, so whenever he had some free time, he was always out on the lake spinning it. He sometimes goes on trips to see new places and catch different kinds of fish. In fact, he spent a lot of time traveling to different parts of the country and different states to find the best places to fish, whether it was on a lake or at sea. We went on vacation. Someplace from my dad to have fun. His favorite hobby was always the most important thing to him. Over the years, he caught all kinds of fish and won several prizes at fishing contests. Even more, there was a picture of him in his local diner holding a huge fish that he caught and cooked that same day. I remember one time, when he was really excited because my mother had finally convinced him that we could go on a cultural trip to New Orleans. He could go to the bayou while my mother and I enjoyed jazz and all the other great things that New Orleans has to offer. My dad was getting all the best gear ready for a long day in the swampy rivers. The bayous and swamps outside of New Orleans aren't always safe, just so you know. They can quickly become very dangerous for people who aren't used to them or don't know what they're doing. Mother and I got back to the hotel late and planned to clean up before going back out to try some prize to New Orleans gumbo. My father was often gone for hours at a time. He would sometimes crawl back into bed late at night, then wake us up in the morning to tell us about the amazing things he saw at lakes. We were very surprised to see him back in the hotel room before us, looking very pale and shaky. Not at all like him. He's been through a lot and seen a lot, so he's not scared of much, especially fishing. Mother was worried that he might have seen an alligator, but unless they were wrestling, there's no reason for him to be scared of an alligator. But when I asked my dad the question, he shook his head. He brought his shotgun with him just in case, but what he saw wasn't a reptile, or so he said. I asked him what it was and what he meant by that. He told me he had never seen anything like this before. I can still remember how afraid he was. He moved his whole body, as he said that what he had seen was unlike anything else he had ever seen. My dad told me that Mom had been sitting there enjoying the quiet and hoping to catch a catfish. Catfish are some of his favorite fish, but I don't like the way they taste compared to other fish. Anyway, he started pulling so hard on the line. It almost pulled everything into the water. He grabbed it and tried to reel it in, feeling excited about what he might find. But whatever was pulling on the other end broke the line. At this point, my father got very angry and scared. He grabbed his net with his long pole and started waving it around the water, trying to figure out what had just broken his line. He told us that when he saw this catch, he got even paler, his forehead got even more shiny, and he started to get really cold. He sounds like he's having a nervous breakdown just telling us this. It frightened me. I've never seen him look like that. My mom's eyes got so big that she asked, "What in the name of God did you see?" At first, my dad told me that he thought it was a big snake because it was big, had a thick reptilian body, and was all white. I thought it might have been an albino river snake of some kind. I could only see the long part of it. But then he said, the hen came to the surface, and I thought he was going to start crying. He said it wasn't a snake. I had a face that looked like a giant sandworm. It had no eyes and a huge mouth that peeled open from the top of its head. Its teeth were huge. This thing looked like it came from the world of Star Wars. It made no sense at all. The rest of the time we were there, we were on vacation. He didn't go into the bayou, and he didn't fish the rest of the time we were there, which was out of character for him because fishing is all he ever does or knows. It took him weeks to get up the nerve to go fishing again at all. I've spent a lot of time searching on Google and doing research over the years, but I've never found any other reports of a supposed giant albino sandworm-like river monster in Louisiana or anywhere nearby. But I knew I'd find someone to tell the story to one day. My mother and I are the only ones who know. I haven't even told my friends because it sounds so strange, but I'm telling you, my father doesn't make up stories. If he did, he wouldn't have gone fishing the rest of the time we were on vacation. So, everyone tells you to be careful of sharks and other dangerous things in the water when you're out in the ocean or on a small sailing boat with your friends. We all know that sharks are something to watch out for. If Jaws is around, it makes sense that you shouldn't go anywhere without a lot of protective gear. Even an idiot would know that. But people usually warn you about sea monsters, or in this case, I should talk about the things that people don't warn you about. This is because people think of them as things from myths, legends, and fairy tales. Am I right? See, in the United Kingdom, the water isn't always full of sharks like it is in many other parts of the world. I expect it to be too bloody cold. But what we do have, I have no idea what it is, and no, I'm not talking about Nessie. We were off the coast of Scotland, so it could have been her cousin or another creature that looked like a dinosaur that was free to roam the ocean. Me and some friends decided to go fishing in a small boat just for fun. A few of the guys and I were drinking, but I was feeling a little off. It turned out that I was a little seasick, and my friend, who we'll call Jay, was in charge of making sure we didn't fall overboard. See, it's important to have someone who is dedicated to this alone. Dan, who was drinking beer, suddenly yelled, Guys, Nessie came to see us, and he brought his girlfriend. We thought he was trying to mess with us, so we laughed and played along, looking over the side of the boat and acting scared. I was almost there. I called him back. I thought I would get a pat on the back and it. Gotcha. Instead, Dan turned his back on Peast. He told me that he wasn't kidding around and that he was very serious. He told me that something out there is making him feel better for a little while longer. We looked again over the edge, and that's when we all saw them. As I said, it wasn't necessary because she's supposed to be big. That doesn't mean these things were tiny. Each one was about as long as a small boat, and as wide as a big guy. There were a lot of them, and their necks looked long, like giraffes or what you would see in a typical drawing of a brontosaurus. But their bodies were much more watery and fish-like. They had little fin-like limbs, like a sea turtle, but their heads were very reptilian. They had big, wide, amber eyes on the sides of their faces, which is almost exactly how a brontosaurus is usually pictured. We were all frozen with fear as we watched. Except for Dan, who must have had as many beers as the rest of us. After making his point, he fell asleep on the boat's floor. Nothing was tried by these things. Just went around us a few times, each time following the other. Then, just as quickly as they had come, they were gone. They had just fallen under the water and could never be found again. So I turned on the engine, and we got the hell out of there. I didn't want to admit how scared I was, so I never really told anyone about it until now. Even though I want to believe that we saw a monster, I don't think we did. The more I think about it, the more likely it seems that we just saw a group of living dinosaurs. Either way, I really think we were lucky that day. Whether those things were dinosaurs or not, they weren't hungry enough to fight, and thank God for that, because they liked meat, especially human flesh, and would have killed us all. Deep sea diving is both stunningly beautiful and scary as hell, especially if you've been to places where you can't see very well. I'm talking about murky water where you can't even see your own hand in front of your face, whether there is light or not. It makes you feel very weak and exposed. Like anything can come out of nowhere and grab you at any time. So, if you like scary movies and scary movies set under the sea, I've been making them for years. And I can tell you that it's true that people have only just begun to learn about sea life. I'd like to think of myself as an experienced diver because I've done so many dives. But I still get scared when I think about things I don't know. I have seen things down there that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. Even though many divers will laugh at me, I'm going to keep telling my story and tell the truth. I'm sure that rescue missions, or what they call bringing bodies back from wreckage, is one of the worst things about being an official diver. But finding corpses that are bloated, smelly, and half-eaten is not the reason I won't dive again. No, it was because of the day I met something I can only call the Kraken. Something a lot worse than the bends. You can laugh at me if you think what I'm saying is crazy, and you can think that I must have had an underwater hallucination, or that my oxygen levels were too low, or that I had way too much nitrogen in my blood. I know what I saw, though. That day, I was as low as I've ever been. Because there was a very bad accident on a cruise ship. There were still a few bodies missing, and, you guessed it, it was my job to find them. Near me, the water was being stirred up by something other than me. So, knowing what I do, I made sure to stay far away. But I saw it at that time. You might wonder why a kraken instead of a big sea octopus. So, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen? A giant octopus that was as big as a shipwreck. I didn't stick around either to count those limbs. But at least some of what must have been human bodies were still in its hands. When I saw its face, I knew it was a monster. Yellow eyes were enough to make me leave. Nobody ever believed me. But neither did those tourists who went missing. I remember what I saw at the bottom, and I'll never go back there again. I may sound like a cliché. I know, but I'm scared and not a very good storyteller. So I'm sorry ahead of time if this sounds corny. But I'm telling you what I saw, and I've been diving a lot and never seen anything like it. In fact, if we were switched and you were telling me this story, I would probably laugh at you and tell you that there is no such thing as a sea monster. I have to say that I was wrong, though. And I was so scared. Not because it could have killed me, but because it was so random, because I don't know what was down there, and because I know there could be bigger or worse things down there that I didn't find. These things keep me up at night. And when I think about this event, it makes me feel even more uneasy. And another reason why I don't want to dive anymore, at least for now. Hello, what lies beneath? I'm sending you this email because I'm desperate. I'm having trouble not wanting to end my life, and if you're reading this, I hope I haven't done it yet. But for at least the last 15 years, my life has been very scary. My name is Muriel, and I'm 83 years old. My family and I all live in the Cambridge, England, area, and by all accounts, we've lived a quiet, happy middle-class life. But I feel like it's too late for me. I now have weak bones and organs, and I feel like my eyesight is getting worse quickly. I feel like I should leave if I don't do this. But before I die, I'd like to take care of any unfinished business. One of those things is what happened in the summer of 1980. When they were on Jersey. I was on vacation. 3 of my children were between 7 and 17 years old at the time. It was the most peaceful and quiet holiday I can remember. The kids liked to play in the ocean and build sandcastles, and my husband loved to play golf, but then something bad happened. Something that has been following me around in my mind for almost 40 years. In fact, I remember it better than ever now. Just because I've had time to think about what I saw and really take it in. We had to put the kids to bed, and the oldest one was already there. So, my husband and I took a short walk along the beach at about 10 or 11 p.m. in any case. It was quiet because it was after dark. I just remember how peaceful I felt when my husband paid me to go to the beach with him so we could walk along the cool sand. It was alluring, romantic, and great. I've always liked the ocean a lot, but the breeze at night and the rhythmic sounds of the waves were just the best way to relax. I can even tell you almost everything about the white summer dress I wore. And I can still remember how comfy it was. That's how much I remember about this event. I was a little surprised that there was no one else in the area, which is usually very busy. But I guess 10-11 p.m. the end was at night. My husband and I walked arm in arm, and I even put my head on his shoulder. I had fun kicking the waves. What happened next, though, shattered our idea of paradise and put us right into a horror movie. At that moment, life seemed perfect. I was 43 years old and on a beach. If God makes all creatures, then he must also make some monsters. Then, a sharp dagger stuck into my lower leg just above my ankle. I started to scream and fell into my husband's arms. When we turned around, we both started screaming as loud as we could. The creature's fangs went right through my lower leg, and it was still holding on to me with what I can only call a poisonous rage. The creature was green and had thick, scaly skin that looked like leather. It was as hard as a rock. It looked like a duck, but its body was windy and bent like a snake's. Its head came up out of the water, then its stomach went under the water, and finally its lower abdomen came up out of the water. It was very strange and disgusting to look at. Its face, on the other hand, was strangely like a lizard's. It had big glowing eyes, big black slits, and what looked like a beak, kind of like an octopus or squid's, that extended into two big fangs. It is hard to explain. This thing seemed to be stuck in my lower leg and was holding on tightly. All I can remember is screaming in horror as my husband tried to kick this beast, but it kept moving around and wouldn't let go of my leg. I didn't know for sure what would happen. I almost passed out from fear. As my husband tried to save me, this thing croaked and groaned and made a lot of noise. I felt a pull, and it seemed like this thing wanted to drag me into the water. I remember yelling no. And my husband doing his best to hold on. Then I was pulled off my feet and dropped to the bottom of the ocean. I can feel my leg being pulled deep into the water with force and intent. The next thing that happened was that I felt a release, then a sharp, dull pain, and then I woke up on the stand with my husband covering my wound with the shirt. He told me that, believe it or not, 3 dolphins formed a ring around me and the beast ran away. I'm afraid to think about what would have happened if that animal had pulled me deeper into the water. I wouldn't be here with you now. Even though I have early onset dementia, it is surprising that I remember all of this. But as I type this, I'm hoping that people who think sharks are dangerous can figure out what this is. Well, you should think again. Whatever this was, it was out to kill me, and the water was only up to my waist. It was strong, violent, and hungry for blood. Now, I feel like my life is coming to an end, and I want to make things right. So, I really hope that such a beast won't be around for future generations. I really worry about our children and the children they will have. All right? So I'm telling this story in my uncle's name. He isn't even close to being tech-savvy enough to share a story through anything but paper, and it's embarrassing, but he still prefers to write letters with a pen and paper. So I try to persuade him that this way is simpler. He hasn't been sober long enough to make complete sentences, but don't tell him I said he has a small part-time job to keep him busy in his old age. I usually say it. I guess it keeps him from drinking so much that he ends up poor and dies. He works on a small barge on the Mississippi River. He is part of a crew that comes and goes. He doesn't always work the whole time he's on the clock, though. He often has to wait for other people to make sure he's free to go or can pick up things, etc. He usually pulls out a bottle and starts drinking during those times when he's waiting for a go-ahead. Then he starts to feel sad, so he turns on his radio. Does anyone you know still listen to an AM radio? Yes, that's definitely my uncle. He also dares to throw a line over the edge of the boat at those times to see if he catches anything. The fish in the rivers around here are very sick. But someone who drinks every day has long since forgotten that. He will do whatever he wants. So he was drinking, fishing, and thinking about the past. He had already caught a few bluegill and a pretty big catfish. The catfish was so big that it wasn't safe to keep because it might have had parasites or something. If you're not a fisherman, I wouldn't expect you to understand or know what I'm talking about. He wasn't too drunk, but he decided it was time to go to the bathroom over the side of the boat. He didn't think anyone could see him because it was too foggy. So he took the radio with him, because he was so drunk that he was getting very emotional and didn't want the music to stop, which made him very angry. He told me that there was suddenly a wall of static, which didn't make sense since it was a local station. There's nothing that makes sense that could mess up the signal. On a clear day, he could see the radio tower from where he was in the river. So he calmed down just long enough to do his job over the back of the boat, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw when he came back around to the front of the boat. Something was sitting on the boat's railing that was neither an insect nor a fish. Those were not my words, they were his. It looked like a cross between an armadillo and a crab. It had a thick shell with many layers, and it seemed to have 4 arms that looked a lot like those of a praying mantis. It had gotten into his cooler where his catches were and was eating his catfish. The head moved and ground away at the fish like an organic buzzsaw, while the rest of the creature stayed perfectly still, almost like a broken animatronic. He said it was like watching a sped-up time-lapse movie, and that the fish was literally melting before his eyes. Soon, only the bones and skeleton were left. This thing didn't notice my uncle until it had eaten the last bite, and that's when it stopped moving. Keep in mind how long it took for this thing to eat all the fish until there was nothing left. It was over in a flash. Its eyes had a strange light that was the same color and brightness as a firefly's eyes. They looked like they were made for seeing underwater. It jumped off the boat right away and won't come back when he's drunk enough. He tries to tell that story to other people, but they just tell him he's crazy. Does anyone know? Or, if anyone has ever heard me, it sounds like a crazy version of the one that got away. I'm not sure. So I could remember the story well, I had to have my uncle tell it to me many times while he was sober. I even ran it by him to make sure it was good. Again, I had to get him sober before he could tell me this story. It took a few tries, so be glad I got a story that makes sense. He seems to think he saw something. So, in spite of all this, I'll send it to your podcast, and if I'm lucky, you can read it to everyone. If not, and you don't believe me, I hope it's still an interesting story, and at the very least, it happened on a very wide part of the Mississippi River and not at sea. I was working on a paddle wheel that was traveling north for 7 days. Around 4 a.m., I was sound asleep when I felt a sudden jolt that almost threw me off my bunk. A split second later, all the emergency alarms went off, and I jumped up so quickly that I forgot I had an A. I hit it so hard with the duct over my head that I made a huge dent in it. I don't know how I didn't knock myself out in the process. I jumped off my bunk, grabbed my life jacket, and was out of my room before I realized I was only wearing boxers. I ran back in, changed into my shorts, and ran for the deck. Once I got to the deck, I saw that it was a foggy night with no moon. People were freaking out because they thought we were going to sink, and the crew was doing what it could to keep everyone calm, even though they didn't know what was going on. Also, we couldn't see the shore or our surroundings no matter how hard we tried because the fog was so thick and the night was so dark. The scariest thing about it all was knowing that whatever we had hit was so big that no one could see it anywhere. People were going crazy from all the waiting. In the end, we all had to stay on deck until sunrise, after which we found out that we had caught some kind of huge fish. I don't know what kind of fish swims that big in the Mississippi, but it gives me the creeps. Just giving it some thought? It was a nearly half-mile wide part of the Mississippi. If someone jumped and tried to swim, they could not have done it unless they were a good swimmer. I know that a half-mile isn't that far, but again, it is if you can't swim very well. Again, I'm wondering what kind of big fish can hit the bottom of a boat and almost knock everyone off their feet. I'm not sure. I do know that the Mississippi flows into the ocean, so I guess it makes sense that sharks and other big fish use it as a big swimming channel. I can't find out. One of my cousins is a skilled crab fisherman who has been doing it for years. I don't even know how many years it's been. This past January, it was probably 4 or 5 years. He told me that he had a close encounter with one of the biggest crabs he's ever seen. He started to tell me about how big Japanese crabs are and how big they are in general. If you need help understanding, they're about 6 feet wide, including their legs, which is crazy big. But this crab was almost as big as a house. I'm talking about something about 15 to 20 feet long. The body alone. We're talking about a crab so big that it could probably eat a hole in a car. Also, I just wanted to say what I thought. It was very scary. My cousin says the story is true and that you can not only ask him, but also the rest of his crew and the captain, because they all saw it too. I don't even want to know what else they see at sea or on that boat when they're by themselves in January. Not my personal experience, but a very good friend of mine was out on his boat off the coast of Western Australia with his dog and another friend when they were hit by a freak wave that sank half of the boat, followed quickly by a second that did the job through. This guy has a lot of experience and wouldn't put himself in a situation like that on purpose. He says that by the time he realized the first wave was coming, the second wave was already on top of them, and the boat went under in 30 seconds. In short, he and his partner were stranded 7 kilometers out to sea, sitting ducks in the middle of the ocean. Also, his dog was tied to the boat so he wouldn't jump into the water, and there wasn't time to set him free. So how do you say goodbye in that split second? I think this is what the event that had a lasting effect was all about. I can't imagine having to watch your best friend get taken by the ocean and not being able to stop it. He tried to dive a few times, and his friend had to stop him physically because he was putting himself in danger. Anyway, this guy seems to be in good shape. As a semi-pro free diver who has always been very active, he is used to the ocean and hard work. His friend, on the other hand, is a regular guy who is a bit overweight and not used to being in the ocean. He has almost no chance of swimming back to shore. So they decide that he should stay in the area, tread water rather than try to get back while my friend goes to shore to find another boat. So, during this mate's partner realizes that he isn't back in time, and they have a plan in place in case this happens again. So she goes to the police and tells them where she is and when. They were supposed to be back, so they looked for them, but couldn't find them. My friend swims 7 kilometers across the open ocean to get to the closest island. I think it was Garden Island, which is a naval base near Perth. It took about 5 hours to be saved by a ship that was moored on the island. He told them where his partner was, they told the police, and he was found. This was a good end to something that could have been bad. I know for sure that these guys haven't really gotten over what happened, and I'm glad I can't even begin to guess what was going through their minds. On a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay with about 7 other men doing a shakedown test cruise planned to be out for about 12 hours, around the middle of the 1980s. Not as reliable for figuring out the weather. We get caught in a tropical storm with winds that gust up to about 50 miles per hour, which is just a little bit less than a weak hurricane. We had just finished putting up storm huzzahs and storm sails because the best sailor on board could tell the storm was coming. If not, we would have been killed by the storm. I thought I could die at any moment. In fact, we used the radio to talk to someone. If you've ever been at sea, you know what I mean. If not, it doesn't matter. It felt like 15 minutes. We were in a tornado and couldn't see anything, but it passed. We'd be alive. This happened around 3 p.m. and although there was cloud cover over the course, the ambient light was such that you could see 2 miles or so in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you know that such storms, particularly in the shallow depths near landmasses, dredge a lot of things of the sea floor. We're all on deck working lines, checking damage, and the bay area around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the same. The sea is confused. I look about 15 feet off the starboard side and something swims to the surface, breaks. The surface looks at us and then submerges again. It was like a thin man with humanoid shape. Arms articulated like a man, a human head, but its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us blank, its weird, heavily lidded eyes, and then dove back under. So maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, and no head injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive. But my senses in that situation were sharpened, not gold. I had at the time about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats and had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster by any means. I made an instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it. The men on this boat were all mechanics, and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake at the time? It was important for each of us to get skipper qualifications, and saying something like that would be heavily frowned upon. And as I stood there in my life, fast soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, whose name I won't mention, with over 30 years experience in the surface Navy, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these big eyes and then went back under." Yeah, I saw it too. I said. No one else said that they had seen it. Then we sailed back to the pier later that day and never spoke of it ever again.